Okay, so I wanted to be able to show you a little bit about what rubrics are and why they're really important for us. You would know from your own school, and particularly university, rubrics are making sure that it's really clear to students what's expected of them in an assessment, but also making clear to them where they were able to perform and what their level of performance is, or level of skill knowledge or application knowledge. And so rubrics are really important to get right, and as part of this assessment, I'm pretty sure that you guys will have to create your own rubric based on an assessment task that I'm going to give you. And so I wanted to go through 3 types of rubrics that you might find in a outdoor environmental studies classroom or across the school. The first one I wanted to show you comes from the Victorian Curriculum and Assessment Authority, so VCA, and it's essentially performance descriptors. So this type of rubric is really useful if you are assessing something that maybe doesn't have really clear marking boundaries. You want to be able to show them their descriptor or their performance in a range, and you want to have some really clear indicators of where their performance sits or where their skill knowledge sits. So this is an example that's come straight from the VCA Outdoor Environmental Study Design. Again, I know that we are not talking and you guys aren't looking at VCE, but I think it's important for us to recognize where the links are, but also it's a great example here. So VCA have actually provided this for us, and this is for Unit 3, Outcome 1. And it says here, this is typical performance in each range. So these are the descriptors that you might assess a student for. And you've got a key marking scale on the bottom here. So based on an assessment piece, maybe it might be a written report, maybe it is question and answer, you would be able to give students back this rubric. So even if you had a SAC or an assessment task that was clearly marked per question. So in outdoor environmental studies, we do this a lot. You would have a question and it would be worth 2 marks, and then you would mark however many marks they got for that response, let's say. You can still do that and then provide them with this descriptor or with this rubric to allow them to have an understanding of where their performance sits, not just in terms of where their marking allocations are, but actually where their application of each topic or each part of the subject or content they sit. So this is one type of rubric. I'm going to give you access to this. The other type of rubric that I wanted to show you is similar in that. So this is an example of a beach task that I share with my Year 10s. It's one of the first tasks they do. I ask them to create a brochure or information card about marine safety and about safety at the beach. I say they can do it in whatever they want, a brochure, a poster, some sort of way that they're giving this information. As if they could, someone walks down to the street or to the beach, they could give this piece of information to them and they would be able to understand what the risks are. So they have to include all of these things, how safe they are, what the hazards are, how it's a rip, what do I do if I'm caught on a rip, this kind of thing. And you can tell even from the type of language I'm using here, my literacy, that my task words literacy, I'm not being as explicit, or I haven't gone into as much depth or detail as I normally would, because this is one of the first assessments that they do. So eventually I would probably change these to say, describe how safe Victorian beaches are, or explain the safety ratings at Victorian beaches, so increasing their literacy. But looking at this here, again, it's a very holistic rubric. So I'm just saying a student who's quite low is going to demonstrate some knowledge. They have some basic information and they've been able to justify their reasoning judgment on the safety of Victorian beaches using anecdotal evidence. Someone who would be achieving an 80 to 90% on this task has got a high level of knowledge and application of skills. It's well thought out and detailed. They've been able to justify their reasonings and judgments, and the brochure is of such a high standard that it could be easily distributed for public use. So when you're creating these rubrics, essentially you're trying to work out what are the standards. So when I'm marking this assessment, how do I ensure that I'm marking it fairly and that all students are able to access it? Another type of rubric is this one. These rubrics are much more explicit. So they are explicit rubrics. These can be really valuable if you are doing question and answers that you really want to make sure every single question or answer you have a rubric allocation for. These are quite time consuming, but they can be really helpful once you've created them in making your life easier when you mark these, especially if it is a question or it is a element of their assessment that doesn't necessarily have a mark allocation for it in terms of describe, the impact of feral cats on environments. You might have that worth 2 marks. Whereas these are a little bit more explicit in terms of maybe it might be describe the overall impact of feral cats on outdoor environments, and you might not have a mark allocation towards that. So these are really great for making it really clear. This is an example of a task that I do with my year 10s. I get them to create their own environmental group. So they can create their own environmental group on whatever they choose. I've had students talking about saving the brumbies before, or reducing plastic, or overfishing, so reducing overfishing, all sorts of things. But it's important that they are thinking really critically about these things. Even the group that did save the brumbies, they were really critical and really evaluating their environmental group and the purpose of it. So we talked a lot about how, the brumbies are an introduced species and they're causing a lot of damage to our alpine environments, and they acknowledged that, and we're trying to reduce ways that maybe we could reduce brumby killings, but they they came up with an idea that they were going to house them and people are going to retrain them into horse races or something along those lines. It doesn't matter what the topic is, just that they were able to give those environmental groups and create them. And so this is an example, and again, I'll give you this rubric of one that's really explicit. It's going through every single question and giving what is expected of each question here. I would recommend doing this only if you feel like it's going to enhance your assessment, and only if you have the time to be able to create that. It does take a long time. It can be really good for students to have a really clear understanding of what they did well or didn't do well in a particular element or a particular question of an assessment, but otherwise they can be quite time consuming. These more holistic rubrics, oops, that's not one. This one here, are much better at giving them performance indicators and descriptors. One way that I would do this is I would separate my ideas of what I want them to be able to achieve and then create a rubric based on that. So with the assessment that I am giving you and that I am showing you that you will annotate and that you will create a rubric on, something like this might be really, really helpful. Okay, this is what the assessment looks like. And what you would do is, you can already see that I've got mark allocations, so you could do it as an explicit rubric or you could do it as a holistic rubric. What do you want these students to achieve? Are you looking at literacy skills? Are you looking at their ability to connect the theory with practical elements? Are you looking at their ability to describe what relationships are with outdoor environments? Are you looking at their ability to really evaluate the impact that some of these interactions that these different groups of people had with outdoor environments were? So hopefully that'll give you a little bit more help in terms of what rubrics are, why they're important, and what types of rubrics you might be able to create. When you do create your own rubric, it's really important to be explicit. Really important to be explicit on what are the things that you are hoping to see, and according to each of the different stages. So, whether it's 30%, 40%, high, low, whatever it is, if we look down here, medium, what performance descriptors they are. Really important to have clear performance descriptors for each part of your rubric.